Nice to see you.
Likewise. I guess looks like we chose the same color, more or less.
We did. The same palette. Well, Rabbi, I'm so grateful for your time and I'm excited to be talking with you now because there's so much stuff happening in the geopolitical and domestic spheres. I know a lot of people are familiar with the fact that you were the founding rabbi of Beit Ha'am, but many people probably don't know as much about the work you've done more recently. So can you start just to talk a little bit about how you came to Maine initially, what you were doing when you were the founding rabbi of Beit Ha'am, and what happened next?
Okay, well, there's sit back. This is a long story. My family's connections to Maine go back to the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries. On my mother's side of the family, they were German Jews from Philadelphia. One of them ran a hotel, I think, in Poland or in Poland Spring. Wouldn't let the Russian Jews in, but that's another issue. My mother got even by marrying one, so it was okay. My grandfather and some of his friends were the founders of Camp Kennebec in Belgrade. And the camp lasted into, I guess, the late 80s, and then the property was leased and then purchased by Camp Moden. But my grandfather also bought a piece of property on the lake. So I ended up here because I was interested in perhaps moving to Maine. I'd been ordained. I was an assistant in a large urban congregation or suburban congregation, I suppose, and looking for whatever the next thing would be, and knew some people here in Portland. And at that point in time, there was no Reform congregation. And next thing you know, we had a group that was, I'm short-circuiting this, that ended up being the nucleus that founded Beit Ha'am. The first year I was part-time with Beit Ha'am and part-time with Bethel and Bangor, going back and forth.
No kidding.
Yeah. And
It's
then
a little commute.
A little bit of a commute. Beit Ha'am really kind of took off. It became a more demanding full-time thing, and I did that for 5 years. And at that point, I had always wanted to pursue graduate studies. And you get to a point where either you do graduate studies or you're not going to do them. So I ended up at the University of Pennsylvania, where I completed a doctorate in the history and literature of Judaism and Christianity in the Greco-Roman world. Worked for a couple of years. This is my whole CV here. Worked for a couple of years at the Institute for Christian and Jewish Studies in Baltimore, which has since become the Institute of Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies. And I managed a project there that produced something called Dabru Emet, a Jewish Statement on Christians and Christianity, which was a groundbreaking initiative from the Jewish community. It was published in the year 2000. Subsequently, there have been other statements from other groups within the Jewish community, but this was the first, and this was also the most broadly endorsed: Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionists, and so forth. I then moved to Chicago, where I was both a congregational rabbi and had a chair in Jewish studies at a Catholic seminary co-funded by a Jew and a Catholic. I taught on the faculty there for 12 years, I believe. And then got the call about the position at ADL. And I've been at ADL in various arrangements for now over 6 years. We originally moved to New York, but decided that Portland was really where we wanted to be, which ended up being a very good move because I'd much rather be in Portland right now than in Manhattan. So I've been the director of interreligious engagement. I now am the senior advisor on Interreligious Affairs in terms of official titles. So that's been my career path.
That's amazing. I didn't realize you'd return to being a pulpit rabbi at any point after leaving Maine.
Yeah, yes. Yes, I had. I'd served I served 3 different congregations in Chicago, actually.
That's amazing. Well, so that's great. So you can sort of bounce back and forth with academia and that more direct work. I know that you were doing a lot of travel for ADL and that your role involved so much work all over the world. Can you talk about how that was structured and then how it looks today?
Sure. Well, first of all, ADL is a constituent member of an organization called the International Jewish Committee on Interreligious Consultations, or IJKIC.
It's quite a mouthful.
Well, quite a mouthful. I like to say it's the most important Jewish organization that no one's ever heard of. It consists of ADL, American Jewish Committee, B'nai B'rith International, World Jewish Congress, the Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, both the congregational bodies and the rabbinic bodies. So the Orthodox Union, the Rabbinical Council of America, Rabbinical Assembly, and USCJ, and the URJ and the CCAR, and an organization called the Israel Jewish Committee on Interreligious Relations. And we, actually the history of IJKIC goes back to the Vatican, shortly after Nostra Aetate, which was the 1965 declaration that sort of revolutionized Catholic-Jewish relations in the post-World War II era. But I'm not sure that that the church had actually considered all of the ramifications of relationships with the Jews, including, in this case, how many different Jewish organizations there are,
right,
all of which we're going to want to meet with the Vatican. And so they sort of came and said, look, can't you guys form one organization? Because, we're interested in Jewish, Catholic relations, but there are other things that are on our agenda. And so this organization was formed, and one of my colleagues likes to say that it was a miracle brought about by the Vatican, because it's one of there are a lot of places where Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox don't necessarily sit at the same table. This is one where we have been very successful now for 50 years, working on consensus and attempting to represent the world Jewish community. It's a bit of a stretch, but to the Vatican, to the World Council of Churches, which represents about 500 million Christians around the world, the Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate. We have recently been in the starting stages of developing some relationships in the Muslim world. So as a result of that, that's where a lot of my globe trotting came in.
So from a process perspective, do you work to do intra-Jewish stuff first? Do you figure out what the stance is going to be first and then engage? Yeah. How does that
work? The organization works on consensus.
Okay.
We have developed some pretty good understandings of what everybody's kind of red lines are. And I think we've been pretty successful at it, actually. There have been some moments in the relationship with the Catholic Church that have been challenging, around, for example, the proposal to build a monastery at Auschwitz, for example. And I don't know if that looks like that's not something
that's news to me. I've never heard. No.
Well, this was some time ago.
Wow.
It was actually Pope John Paul II would be waded in and sort of helped resolve that. But there have been some moments there, but the group as itself, as a whole, has worked very well together and continues to. At the moment, it just so happens that the chair is my colleague, Rabbi Noam Marans at the American Jewish Committee, who has his ordination from JTS and is a conservative rabbi. I am the vice chair, Reform Rabbi, and Rabbi Mark Dratch, who is the executive of the Rabbinical Council of America, is the treasurer, and we are the officers. So it's really, I think it's quite a story. So
it seems like an amazing example of working effectively within the Jewish community. Have you found that it's gotten harder in different ways? Has interfaith work, either internally or the externally focused work, has it changed over time?
Well, leaving aside for a moment what happens when you can't be in person, because that is a significant aspect of the kind of work that we do. I'm not sure that it's gotten harder. It's gotten in some ways more interesting, I think, because, for example, with the Roman Catholic Church, over the last 55 years, not only was there Nostra Aetate, but there have been a whole string of Vatican documents, papal writings, speeches, and so forth that have really moved, in terms of the nature of the relationship itself, it's really moved it past those initial stages. I think that both on a personal level, sort of person to person, but also institutionally, we've developed a really good rapport there. And we don't have to start at square one each time. For example, at our most recent meeting, while we did spend some of the time looking at specific issues in the Catholic-Jewish relationship, we also spent a fair amount of time looking at issues of migration, for example. So we now, I think, have, we've gotten to a point where we can look outside a little bit more and not just inside. I think one of the things that I'm sure this won't come as a surprise, that is a major concern in our discussions broadly are issues of Israel. With the Roman Catholic Church, interestingly enough, Ichkik, now I'm really getting into the weeds here, so if you want to, pull me back, let me know. But Ichkik's the address for Ichkik's relationships with the Vatican is something called the Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews, which is housed inside, I think it's now called a dicastery, but anyway, the Council for Promoting Christian Unity. Okay, not in the Council for Interreligious Dialogue.
Right.
Because from the perspective of the church, the Jews aren't perceived as being a different religion in the way that Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism and
they're sort of pre-Christian or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure that it has to do with chronology, because some of the Eastern religions are older as well. But I think it has to do with the special relationship, the sharing of scripture. Right. And not that, people say, well, they're promoting Christian unity. That sounds, like missionary activity. Right. I think it has more to do that, we didn't fit into either, but we fit into that one better. But I raise all of that because that sort of bureau, that office in the Vatican, deals with religious relations. It doesn't deal with diplomatic relations. Remember, the Vatican is a independent state. So that's through the Secretary of State, right? So with whom we also meet, but there we're meeting much more on the diplomatic level than on the religious theological level. And in some ways that makes the discussion easier.
You talked about the creation of a relationship so that you don't have to start at square one every time. Yeah. Are you usually looking at issues that are very time sensitive, that are focused around particular challenges or moments, or are there also broader arches of work that you're doing all the time?
Well, I think this kind of operates on two levels. We meet periodically with the leadership of these various groups, World Council of Churches, the Orthodox Patriarchate, and the Vatican. And these meetings are meetings that are planned well in advance, and you have speakers and discussions and so forth. Those don't really lend themselves to some immediate issue. But what that does mean is that if something comes up, I pick up the phone and I call Father Hoffman at the Council for Religious Relations with the Jews, and I don't call him Father Hoffman to his face. It's Norbert, right? So and I can, what's going on here now? In the time has gotten mushy, so
for all of us, yeah.
But in the fall, I think it was in the fall, an Italian artist unveiled a huge painting of the martyrdom of Simon of Trent. This is one of the early blood libel charges, and in fact there used to be a day for Simon in the Catholic calendar. It was taken out of the calendar but this picture was celebrating this, and it had the Jews who killed him looking like something coming out of Der Stürmer. I mean, really hook nose, dark. So we immediately contacted, now this is not a Vatican, technically this isn't a Vatican issue. It was a local issue. Okay, it was kind of like a state issue rather than a federal issue, right? Yeah. But our friends at the Vatican knew who to put us in touch with. Even before we could reach out, they had already taken steps. That's the kind of thing that you get when you develop both personal and institutional relationships.
Well, it's interesting because you describe being outside of the diplomatic infrastructure, but certainly the work that you're doing is in some ways laying the groundwork for additional types of engagement.
Well, one of the things that was more a point about the way that the Vatican was structured. But yeah, I mean, this is, I guess this is civil society work,
right?
Let's put it that
exactly.
way, NGO work. But
yeah.
you do, they aren't mutually exclusive worlds. They intersect, and there are opportunities for those sort of things. I do believe that that a lot of the interreligious work, Jewish Muslim work, and more broadly Muslim initiatives in interreligious relations are very closely aligned with some of the geopolitical stuff that's going on. I mean, it would be naive to think elsewise.
Well, so apropos of that, I mean, obviously we're looking at potentially a new era of international relations with a transition of presidential power. Do you have thoughts about how ADL will navigate that, how these kinds of entities, it sounds like, exist sort of supranationally and above the governmental changes, but are there things you anticipate being different in the short term?
The things that ADL focuses on, the ADL mission is to fight the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. So, anti-Semitism has always been a focus for ADL. As we've seen what's been going on around us, that has become more. It's hard to say for ADL that anti-Semitism has become more of a priority, but it is, and especially globally. One of the areas that ADL has been putting a lot of energy into is specifically hate on the internet, social media, and so forth. So you saw that with Stop Hate for Profit a few months ago, and then there was I think it was an Instagram walk out. I don't know what you sit in, whatever you would, call it. We noted recently that Facebook figured out that Holocaust denial somehow didn't belong on its platform. That's something that ADL and many others have been harping on for a long, long time. It's a huge task to monitor the, hundreds of millions of whatever messages and tweets, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things that we're working on at our Center for Technology and Society is using AI to do some of this. Now, again, I don't know the first thing about this, okay? I mean, I'm on Zoom, that's excellent. But how do you keep up with technology? And I think this is one of the areas where ADL is putting a lot of energy and establishing a lot of partnerships as well.
We've been so grateful to ADL in New England for the resources and support that they provide people in Maine. And I think it's important that people know how much individual synagogues rely on them, and we at the J rely on them to help us navigate all kinds of questions, actually. I know you get this a lot, but people have a sense that there's a ramping up of anti-Semitic activity, that there's a ramping up of white supremacist activity and speech. Do you see that kind of a trend? And sort of how do you interpret what's been happening over the last couple of years?
If we take a look, ADL does an annual audit of anti-Semitic events. And if you take a look at that, this is all on adl.org, got to throw that plug in there. If you look at our annual audit of anti-Semitic events, you'll see that over the past few years, they have gone steadily up. Just over 2 years ago, we had the worst anti-Semitic attack in the history of the United States. In Pittsburgh, we had the violent attack in Poway, and then a couple in the New York area. And in the age of the internet, again, everything gets amplified. Mm-hmm. At the same time, ADL has, since the 1960s, been doing surveys of attitudes within the American population. And if you take a look at the numbers, when we started doing these in the 60s, I won't go into the details of the methodology. Again, I'm not a sociologist either. If you want to contest the methodology, please talk to the people who do it. I'm just presenting the results, okay? But in the 1960s, you had as many as 29%, almost 30% of the American population holding anti-Semitic ideas. Over the last decade or so, that number has now been holding steady around 11, 12, 13%. Okay? Even while over the past few years, we've seen a significant rise in the number of events. So what we have on the one hand or incidents. We have a rise in the number of incidents, graffiti, name calling, murder, but it seems that in general, the population has not, we haven't seen a parallel rise in negative attitudes. Now, how do you interpret that, right? That's a good question. I think that the best answer that I have heard is that in the context of what has happened to our public discourse, this is a gross overgeneralizations, but we tend to label and name call much more than we tend to dig into substance and have conversations about real issues, okay? And scoring points has become, a measure of success. And I can be outrageous, and I can say whatever I want, and I can use whatever language I want. And until very recently, again, if we're talking about the internet, there were very few consequences, and people, so we have an environment in which this kind of dehumanizing discourse has become the norm.
Normalized, yeah.
And then when you take that, and then you take a look at that 11, 12, 13% of the population having anti-Semitic ideas. That doesn't mean that there are 11 million Hitlers out there. That means that somebody, has, most of these people probably, would never do anything actively to hurt anybody. They have ideas, okay? But there is a group, a subset of that group, that rather than having attitudes, really has an ideology. Of those people that have an ideology, there's an even smaller subset who may feel in this current environment that the constraints that might have held them in check a decade ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago are gone. That's how I try to reconcile the sort of steadiness of the attitudes versus the rise of the incidents. The other thing that I would say is that both ADL and Pew do a kind of survey where they ask people for their positive response to different groups. The Jewish community is always either at the top or very near the top of groups that Americans feel good about. So again, I think we have to look at the entire picture. There is real dangerous anti-Semitism out there. Our communities need to protect themselves, make sure that everybody is safe, and we need to work with law enforcement when that is, well, that's always a good thing to do, but especially when something happens, and we need to be prepared. But I think that we also need to take a step back and look at the entire picture, so that we understand exactly what's going on.
That's really useful. It also occurs to me, the work of the community relations councils locally and nationally is very much in line with some of the work that you're doing, creating these relationships, making sure people have a sense of who to call if you have a concern about what's going on in another community, and also just regularizing friendship and interaction in a normal way with people who are coming from different backgrounds, and that can be incredibly powerful. Are there other things that you suggest people look to, or other, in addition to ADL and CRC, either places for people to look for good news or comfort around this stuff, or to get more active and involved in making a difference?
Depends what level people are interested in. There's the Interfaith Youth Corps out of Chicago run by Ibu Patel, for example, which is a really interesting organization targeting younger people in leadership, right? There's something called the Council of Centers of CCJR, Council of Centers of Christian Jewish Relations, which is a consortium of 34 mostly academic centers around the country. They have a very interesting web page. They've got good conferences, lots of webinars going on if people are interested in that kind of stuff. It would benefit our society if we had more opportunities to talk to others and listen to others and hear how they explain their positions. We might not agree. We might find that we're more sympathetic to some of it than we thought we were, and vice versa. But we're not going to get anywhere, I don't think, unless we have some of these conversations. And I look at I look at Jewish Catholic relations and Jewish Christian relations. And again, we have a very good dialogue with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Okay. Most organizations in the Jewish community, not all, but most in the Jewish community, differ with the church on issues of abortion and same-sex marriage. And these are not, these are not side issues. These are central issues. And we disagree on those. And we're able to work together on other issues where we do agree, whether it's specifically the Catholic Jewish agenda or other social issues, immigration, for example, where we're on the same page. And we acknowledge that difference. We don't sweep it under the carpet, but we don't allow that to be determinative for the entire relationship. And I don't know, I think that's something that people could learn from.
I think, yeah, for right now, that feels like a very profound concept to try to keep going in the face of disagreement. Rabbi, thank you so much for your time. It's always so fun to talk with you, and very interesting. And we'd love to have you back again as the year progresses, and maybe we get out of our houses a little bit more for additional conversation.
Sure.
Hope to see you again soon.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
J-Talks is a project of the Jewish Community Alliance of Southern Maine and is produced by Sarah Halley Richardson. If you are interested in being featured, learning more about the program, or providing support, please feel free to contact us or visit our website at www.mainejewish.org.